How wonderful was it just a few months ago when Keir Starmer won the election with an enormous majority, promising to deliver change and growth. Many of us had hopes that they would find a way to navigate away from the Brexit nonsense and free up trade with our biggest trade partners as quickly as possible and ensure growth. But here we are, a few months into his premiership, and the only thing that he seems absolutely intent on is protecting Theresa May's hard red lines on Brexit, which mean that he's boxed in a corner and cannot deliver change or growth. As we go into the budget, we can see how difficult this position is for them and us, because the only way that growth can return is by Britain getting rid of the trade barriers between us and our biggest market, on which we rely for the most basic of commodities.
I think where they have to be quite careful is that this narrative of growth, I take the point that you have to have great tax take to pay for public services, etc. But you also have to have growth, and you have to be making money. The economy has to be doing its thing, and the animal spirits, to use that nice old phrase of John Maynard Keynes, is they've got to be feeling quite perky. I mean, the animal spirits can't just be laying under the duvet saying this is a terrible budget for me and for people I employ, or take down the number of employees, which I do think is worrying if you want to send this growth message. Now, I have a bit of a different view maybe to Greg on this, on the sort of tax and spend, which is what I'm missing is if Labour is the agent of change on growth, if it's the agent on change on creating a much more modern, a better technologically enabled NHS, to sort of curing things as well as simply decanting money from one pot to the other, I have not yet heard the recipe. The fundaments of that need to be in Rachel Reeves's budget. Otherwise, we'll sit here on these panels forevermore saying she made the wrong choices.
Last month on the New Statesman podcast, Andrew Marr was asked 2 questions about Brexit, which show the difficulties of trying to please the electorate on Brexit. The Brexit-believing people fear that Keir Starmer is going to betray Brexit via the back door, and the Remainers are feeling betrayed because nothing is being done about getting rid of Brexit. And the result of this position means no growth, no progress, and it also means that Keir Starmer will have no base to win the next election.
Is it wise for Keir Starmer to signal to the British people that he intends for the UK to become part of the EU through the back door? I'm not sure he did say that, but anyway, half of the electorate will not be happy. The second one is from YouTube viewer Welcome the Revolution, who asks, when can we expect Labour to produce an impact assessment of Brexit?
Well, it wouldn't be wise because he hasn't done it and he won't do it. He's not going back into the EU or the single market or the customs union. And now there are many people listening and some people in the room perhaps who wish he would, but he won't. He's been absolutely crystal clear on that. And indeed, when it came to the much, as it were, less provocative things like rights for young workers to move across, he's been pretty cold on that as well. And I think he's, this very, very delicate game that he's playing of trying to persuade Scholz, who's under huge pressure, of course, internally at the moment, and Macron, etc., to allow specific deals on cross-border goods and to, limit the really, really onerous new passport requirements that are coming in October and all of that. Without giving much away. It's a very, very difficult. His stock in Europe is very high, but this naive belief in some people before the election that because it was a Labour government, because they weren't beastly Brexiteers, because they said they loved Europe and they had holiday homes in Provence, it would be easy, forget it. The EU will always negotiate very, very toughly, and still is.
But what do you think a reset, which is the word that Labour have used, can possibly look like then? So, if all those things are excluded?
Sectoral dynamic alignment, he said excitingly.
Very sexy.
No, which only means, you take chemicals or you take pharmaceuticals or whatever it is, and you do a specific deal, which means that on pharmaceuticals, we will carry on changing our regulations in lockstep with the EU. And in return for that, there will be no tariffs, no hesitations at the border. And you do that over a series of very important but individual sectors, whatever it might be, advanced engineering and so on. And after a while, it looks a bit like being inside the single market without ever having done that. In other words, you do it finger by finger by finger, and suddenly you've got a fist. I don't think it's going to work that way. I think the EU sees too much of it as cherry picking, and I think it's easier to explain than it is to actually negotiate. But that, I think, is as much of a plan as they have at the moment.
I have thought for a while that closer alignment with the EU means never mentioning Brexit, rejoining, single market, customs union, and those kind of really provocative phrases. It means making it as boring as possible. As Andrew said, sort of referring to things like a sectoral agreement under paragraph 2.1b of the regulatory framework. Please see footnote X. Like it means
no one reads it.
So that nobody reads it, and so it's like, oh, this is just a boring trade thing. We don't have to worry about that. It's not, customs union, which people feel really strongly about. But there are limits to it. Also, it takes a really long time, and it's not ever going to be as comprehensive as going back to where we were. But I think there is real fatigue among all the parties, actually. We spent 8 years having this argument, and there were a lot of other debates and policy issues that we didn't look at enough because all the airtime was on this. And I don't think there's any appetite within Labour to restart at all. So in answer to the person's question who says, when are we going to get an impact assessment? I just don't think Labour want to reopen any of that.
But also, is it worth doing an impact assessment? I mean, it's happened. There's many other problems to solve that are more pressing, arguably.
What matters most, what matters only really in all of this is the extent to which we get inward investment and the first green shoots of growth under Rachel Reeves. Everything hangs on that. And I think they'll be hoping that a series of announcements by big private sector companies, by big sovereign wealth funds about investing in this or that aspect of the UK over the next 6 months, as it were, that is the impact assessment. Do you know what? The impact is we're doing quite well at the moment anyway.
I disagree with Andrew Marr on this. We are not doing fine. We have real problems because of Brexit, and it's hard to see how those problems can be solved without getting rid of Brexit. But we continue on and hope that common sense prevails in the end.
The opinion polls showing that there's a majority in favour of rejoining the EU. And I think if you look at younger people, that majority is even starker than it is with older people. And that says to me that over time, there's only one way in which political opinion in the UK is going to go, and that's going to be for stronger support for rejoining. You mentioned the opinion polls showing that there's a majority in favour of rejoining the EU. And I think if you look at younger people, that majority is even starker than it is with older people. And that says to me that over time, there's only one way in which political opinion in the UK is going to go, and that's going to be for stronger support for rejoining and making that happen. So I think from the UK's perspective, that needs to be our long-term goal. I think politically it's far too early to say that, because one of the things that we need to do in order to achieve that is get political consensus in the UK about the direction in which we need to go. We'll never get complete agreement on that, but we need to have strong political majority view that that's the destination that we're headed for. And then we can have a sensible discussion about the steps that we need to take to achieve that.